The Alpha King walked into the throne hall 15 years late, and Stacy Hill was still carrying the memory of a moonlit fence where a boy had sworn he'd come back for her. He'd kept his word. He'd become Alpha. But in 2 weeks, he was binding himself to someone else, and she was here to be erased. Stacy Hill was gripping the wooden rail of the petitioner's box when the palace corridor went silent. Not the respectful hush of courtiers waiting their turn, where whispered gossip drifted between marble columns and advocates shuffled parchment, but the airless quiet that came before an execution. The kind that made her instincts scream to run, even as protocol locked her knees in place. She looked up from the summons clenched in her trembling hand and felt her heart stop. Royal guards, 2 full squadrons of them, lining the corridor in flawless formation, their crimson cloaks cutting through the pale morning light like fresh wounds against ancient stone. They stood with the lethal stillness of wolves waiting for the signal, hands resting on ceremonial blades that weren't ceremonial at all, eyes scanning the crowd of petitioners who had already melted into alcoves and side passages. And behind them, moving through the parting masses like inevitability given form, him. Her breath caught, sharp and painful, somewhere between her chest and throat. She'd seen his face carved into monuments throughout the territory, heard reverent whispers from travelers who'd witnessed his coronation and returned with tales of the young Alpha King's savage grace. She knew he'd grown powerful, had transformed from the lanky boy she remembered into something far more dangerous. But nothing, no carved stone, no breathless account had prepared her for seeing Matthew Brown in the flesh. The Alpha King stepped through the archway into the throne hall, and 15 years between them shattered like glass. He was overwhelming. Taller than the myths suggested, easily clearing most men by half a head, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a fractured kingdom. Power radiated from him now, evident in the controlled precision of each movement, the sharp line of his jaw, the way even the light seemed to bend around him in deference. Dark hair fell just past his collar, longer than tradition demanded, and his face had shed every trace of boyhood, all brutal angles and devastating elegance now, carved into something that made her chest ache with equal parts recognition and grief. But his eyes were exactly the same, storm gray and intense, locking onto her now with a focus that stole the oxygen from her lungs. She'd know those eyes anywhere, had memorized them in the dim glow beneath a moonlit fence when he'd whispered a promise that a 15-year-old boy had no business making, a promise that seemed as impossible as touching the stars. "I'll come back for you when I'm Alpha." The throne hall contracted around them, the vaulted ceiling pressing down until it felt like the entire palace couldn't contain enough air for both of them to breathe. He moved closer with that predator's fluidity he'd learned somewhere between leaving her and becoming this, something ancient and untouchable and crowned. Stacy should drop her gaze, should sink lower, press her forehead to the cold marble, speak only when permitted. But her knees had already made that choice for her. She was already kneeling when he entered, not in submission to him, but to the elaborate fiction the council had orchestrated. They'd summoned her here as a disgraced petitioner, a nobody begging for crumbs of justice for a family the palace had destroyed. She was meant to be invisible, powerless, beneath his notice. She was meant to stay on her knees and then disappear. The Alpha King stepped 3 paces from where she knelt, and for one suspended heartbeat, the boy she'd loved and the king he'd become existed in the same devastating moment. His expression revealed nothing, trained into the careful mask of sovereignty, but something flickered behind those gray eyes. Recognition, confusion, something that looked dangerously close to pain. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of 15 years and a crown he'd never asked for. "Rise." But Stacy Hill had learned long ago that the palace's commands came with prices written in blood and buried secrets. And as she slowly lifted her eyes to meet his, refusing to stand, refusing to obey, refusing to play the role they'd scripted for her, she saw the exact moment Matthew Brown realized. This was no coincidence. She hadn't been summoned to beg. She'd walked into the Alpha King's throne room knowing exactly what the council feared, that he would recognize her. But that recognition was precisely what they'd spent 15 years trying to prevent. The council had begun erasing Stacy Hill long before she understood what erasure meant. She was 12 when the whispers started. Her father, a respected territory judge, minor nobility with an honest name, began receiving fewer appointments. Her mother's invitations to court functions quietly stopped arriving. At first, it seemed like coincidence, political tides shifting, nothing personal. Then came the accusations. Embezzlement, falsified records, treason, whispered behind closed doors but shouted in public squares. Her father's protests drowned beneath a chorus of manufactured evidence, testimonies from witnesses who wouldn't meet his eyes, documents bearing seals he'd never touched. The trial lasted 3 days. The verdict was decided before the first witness spoke. Stacy remembered kneeling, not in the throne hall then, but in the council chamber, marble cold against her knees while elders in ceremonial robes pronounced judgment. Her mother wept silently beside her. Her father's hands shook with impotent rage. The Hill bloodline is hereby dissolved from territorial records, all titles, lands, and rights revoked. She didn't understand. Bloodlines didn't just dissolve. Families didn't vanish from existence because of accusations. But theirs did. Within a month, they were ghosts. No official banishment. That would require documentation. Just quiet exile to the outer districts where records didn't reach and memories were short. Her father died within the year, heartbroken by disgrace he'd never earned. Her mother followed 2 winters later. Stacy survived by becoming invisible. Matthew left for the Alpha trials that same autumn. She'd written him 7 letters, each one carefully hidden from prying eyes, each one sent through channels that promised discretion. None were answered. She told herself he was busy, training, proving himself. He'd come back when he could. Then, 5 years later, a proclamation plastered every wall in the capital. Matthew Brown, Alpha King, coronation in 30 days. He'd kept his promise. He'd become Alpha. He just hadn't come back for her. Matthew Brown had never stopped searching for the girl beneath the moonlit fence. He'd won the Alpha trials through blood and brutal calculation, survived 3 assassination attempts before his 18th birthday, and claimed a crown he'd never wanted, all while hunting for a ghost. The council had been efficient in their deception. The Hill family relocated voluntarily, Elder Corwin had told him, voice smooth as poisoned honey. The girl chose another pack. A fresh start, Your Majesty. You understand. Matthew didn't understand. Stacy wouldn't leave without word, wouldn't choose another pack when she'd promised to wait. But when he sent investigators, they returned empty-handed. No records, no forwarding location. The Hill name had been scrubbed from territorial registries as though the family had never existed. He pushed harder. That's when the whispers started. The young king is distracted, obsessed with a childhood infatuation, unfit to lead. Political allies became distant. Trade agreements stalled. The council watched him with predatory patience, waiting for him to overstep, to give them grounds to question his reign. So Matthew learned to search quietly. He sent trusted scouts to outer territories, paid informants in border towns, cross-referenced refugee records and exile logs. Every lead dissolved into nothing. Every trail went cold. Her name became a weapon they held over him, unspoken but present in every negotiation, every veiled threat. "Focus on your kingdom, your majesty. Leave the past buried." He accepted the crown because refusing it meant death. He played their political games because survival demanded it. He stopped asking questions aloud. But he never stopped wondering. Late nights in the palace library, he'd search old judicial records for anything bearing the Hill family seal. He'd memorize the faces of petitioners who came before his court, hoping, always hoping, to see those eyes again. 15 years of searching, 15 years of silence. Then the petition arrived on his desk. Stacy Hill, requesting audience, matter of family injustice. And when she was brought before him, already kneeling in his throne hall, Matthew realized with a devastating clarity, they hadn't just hidden her, they'd made him king to keep them apart.
Rise. Stacy didn't move. The council shifted in their elevated seats, exchanging glances that reeked of satisfaction. To them, she was exactly what they'd orchestrated, a broken petitioner too traumatized to obey even a direct command from the Alpha King. Perfect. Let them think her frozen with fear. Let them believe 15 years of erasure had crushed whatever spirit she'd once possessed. The longer they underestimated her, the more time she had to understand what they were truly afraid of. Matthew's jaw tightened. He took a step closer. The air between them shifted. Heat bloomed across Stacy's skin, sudden and disorienting, like standing too close to a forge. Her pulse spiked. The marble beneath her knees seemed to tilt, though nothing had moved. Every instinct in her body screamed contradiction. Run toward him, run away from him, don't move, never stop moving. Matthew's hand flexed at his side, barely perceptible. His breathing had changed, shallow, controlled. He felt it too. "Your Majesty," Elder Corwin's voice sliced through the tension like a blade. "The petitioner appears overwhelmed. Perhaps we should postpone." "No." Matthew's eyes never left hers. "She stays." Corwin's smile was a razor wrapped in silk. "Of course, though I must remind your Majesty, the Alpha Union ceremony is in 12 days. Protocol demands your full attention on matters of succession, not historical grievances." Alpha Union ceremony. Stacy's mind sharpened, despite the dizzying pull. She recognized 2 names among the witnesses listed for the ceremony, Elder Corwin and Counselor Thane. The same men who'd signed her father's death warrant. The same men who'd profited from her family's dissolution. This wasn't a wedding. Matthew's upcoming bond ceremony wasn't about succession or alliance. It was the final move in a 15-year game, and she was the piece they'd left alive too long. As Matthew extended his hand to help her rise, Stacy understood. They hadn't summoned her to beg for justice. They'd summoned her to die quietly before the ceremony made their coup permanent. The palace archives smelled like secrets and decay. Stacy slipped between towering shelves long past midnight, her stolen clerk's key cold against her palm. The council had granted her temporary quarters, a calculated mercy designed to keep her visible and controlled. They hadn't anticipated she'd use their supervision against them. The sealed records vault sat behind 3 locks and a warding sigil that should have repelled anyone without alpha blood. It opened for her like recognition. Her hands shook as she unrolled the parchment marked with her family crest, not the minor judicial seal she remembered, but something older, fiercer. Bloodline, Hill, Archer. Status, outlawed. Eradication order, unanimous council vote. Year, maple leaf. Offense, unsanctioned alpha heritage. Dual line descent. Threat to territorial stability. The words blurred.
Her childhood illness, the fevers that had nearly killed her at age 7, the weakness that plagued her for years, hadn't been sickness, suppression. Someone had bound her alpha blood before it could awaken, wrapped it in magical chains tight enough to mimic frailty, tight enough for everyone, including her, to believe she was powerless. But suppression wasn't permanent, and proximity to another alpha? Stacy's hand cramped suddenly, fingers curling with strength that hadn't existed yesterday. Her senses sharpened. She could hear footsteps 3 corridors away, smell the guard rotation changing shifts, feel the pulse of power thrumming through the palace's ancient stones. Matthew's presence was breaking the seal. Every moment near him unraveled another thread of the binding. She pulled another document from the vault, this one stamped with the official seal. Alpha Union, Matthew Brown and Celestine Thane. Witnesses, council majority. Binding clause, sovereign authority transfers to council oversight pending. The rest was coded, but Stacy understood enough. The ceremony wasn't just designed to isolate Matthew politically, it was designed to strip his power entirely. They were coming for them both.
Matthew found her in the East Tower at dawn, silhouetted against rose-gold light. You weren't summoned here for justice. His voice was rough from a sleepless night. You came knowing what they do. Stacy turned, documents clutched in her hands. Your letters never reached me. Mine never reached you. I know. He'd spent the night tearing through council communications, finding gaps where her name should have been. They intercepted everything. They erased my family from existence. Her voice cracked. Made you king so you'd be untouchable. Made me nothing so I'd be forgotten. You were never nothing to me. The words hung between them like a confession. The pull intensified, that magnetic heat that had plagued them both since the throne hall. Stacy's breath hitched as understanding crystallized. This isn't just memory. No. Matthew's hands fisted at his sides, fighting the instinct to close the distance. It's a mate bond, sealed when we were children. Why? Because together we're dangerous. He gestured at the documents she held. Your bloodline, my crown. They couldn't control us if we knew what we were to each other. The bond strained against its magical restraints, every moment of proximity fraying it further. Stacy could feel his emotions now, 15 years of searching, rage at the council's betrayal, devotion that had never dimmed. Matthew's jaw worked. Then he moved, not toward her, but to the door. Out, all of you, now. Guards fled, the door sealed. When he turned back, Matthew Brown, Alpha King, untouchable sovereign, sank to his knees before her. No crown, no throne, just the boy who'd made an impossible promise. I came back for you, he said, voice breaking. I just didn't know they'd made me king to keep me away. Stacy's hand lifted, trembling, stopping inches from his face. If she touched him now, the bond would shatter its bindings completely. The ceremony, she whispered, it's designed to strip your power, transfer authority to the council. Matthew's eyes blazed. Then we have 12 days. To do what? Burn it all down or let them win. The palace hummed with ceremony preparations, gilded lies wrapped in tradition. Stacy watched from the shadows of the library as servants draped the bonding chamber and ceremonial silks, every detail meticulously planned, every ritual component precisely measured, every step designed to kill the Alpha King. She decoded the ceremony's true structure, working through ancient binding texts. The traditional Alpha Union required mutual consent, witnessed vows, a symbolic exchange of power. This ceremony had been modified. Here, she spread the diagrams before Matthew in his private study, their only safe space. The third ritual circle, it's inverted. Matthew's expression darkened. Inverted circles don't bond, they drain. Exactly. By the time you realize what's happening, you'll be too weak to resist.
They'll call it ritual failure, blame incompatibility, divine rejection. You'll die before witnesses who swear it was fate. And Celestine? Stacy pulled another document. Celestine Thane, Elder Corwin's niece. She's been positioned for this since childhood. Matthew's hand slammed the desk. How long have they been planning? 15 years, since they erased me. Stacy met his eyes. We were the variable they couldn't control. Now you're isolated, and I'm supposedly broken. Perfect conditions. Except you're not broken. Something fierce flickered across his face. I felt your power yesterday, your awakening. She was. Her senses grew sharper daily. Strength flooded muscles that had been artificially weakened her entire life. Last night, she'd moved a stone bookshelf without touching it. I'm training, admitted Stacy, in secret, but I'm untested, unstable, and I'm gathering support. Matthew's voice dropped. Loyalists who never trusted the council. It's not enough for a clean coup, but... A knock shattered their planning. Your Majesty, a messenger's voice, urgent. The council has called emergency session. The ceremony has been moved up. How long? Matthew demanded. 5 days, sire. Stacy's blood turned to ice. They knew. Somehow the council knew they were planning resistance, and they were moving to kill Matthew before he could stop them.
The bonding chamber blazed with ceremonial fire. Matthew stood at the inverted circle's center, Celestine beside him in ritual white, the council surrounding them in perfect formation. Their chants rose in calculated harmony, ancient words twisted into weapons. Stacy felt the magic activate from her concealed position in the gallery, a crushing weight designed to drain alpha essence until nothing remained. Matthew's knees buckled. No! Her voice cut through the chanting. Every head turned. Stacy stepped into the firelight, and the air itself seemed to bend around her. Power, 15 years of suppressed alpha blood, ignited like wildfire beneath her skin. Her eyes blazed with authority that had been stolen and buried and locked away, but never destroyed. This ceremony is a lie. Her voice carried the resonance of command, undeniable and absolute. And I have proof. She raised the sealed documents, magic amplifying her words throughout the chamber. The Hill Archer bloodline, outlawed not for treason, but for dual alpha descent. My family was erased to prevent challenge to council authority. Elder Corwin moved. Seize her! Kneel! The word ripped from Stacy's throat with primal force. Corwin's knees hit marble before he could stop himself, compelled by alpha dominance he hadn't felt in decades. The council's chants faltered. Matthew straightened, the draining magic disrupted. He met Stacy's eyes across the chamber, understanding flashing between them. Together. Matthew's voice rang with judgment. Daughter of Counselor Thane, niece of Elder Corwin, placed in my court not for alliance, but for assassination. Celestine's mask cracked. Her hands moved toward hidden steel. Loyalist guards were faster. The chamber erupted. Council members scrambling, loyal packs flooding in, truth spreading like fire through the assembled witnesses. Matthew stepped out of the inverted circle, breaking its power completely. Then he did something no Alpha King had done in 300 years. He walked past the council, past tradition, past every law designed to keep them apart, and claimed Stacy Hill's hand before every witness in the kingdom. The ceremony, he declared, will be rewritten. The throne hall stood silent in dawn's aftermath. Bodies removed, traitors bound, the council's 3-century stranglehold shattered in a single night of revelation and resistance. Stacy stood at the window overlooking the capital, watching the city wake to a kingdom transformed. Her hands no longer trembled, her power no longer felt foreign, it hummed through her veins like coming home. The old laws are being struck from record. Matthew's voice came from behind her, familiar warmth cutting through exhaustion.
Every suppression mandate, every bloodline restriction, every manipulation they used to control us. And the council? Disbanded. New structure. Representatives chosen by packs, not birthright. He moved closer, careful still, respectful of the space between them. It'll take time to rebuild. Time we have now. The bond might pulse between them, no longer sealed, no longer forced into silence. It simply was. Patient, waiting for them to choose it freely. Matthew extended his hand, palm up, an offer, not a command. 15 years ago, I promised I'd come back for you when I became alpha. Stacy's breath caught. I kept the first half. His storm gray eyes held hers with devastating honesty. Became alpha, claimed the crown, built the power. He stepped closer, closing the distance they'd maintained through strategy and survival and sacred restraint. But the promise was never about the title, Stacy. It was about coming back, about choosing you when the whole world tried to keep us apart. Her hand lifted, finally touching his face. The bond sang with recognition, with 15 years of longing, with truth no counsel could suppress. So I'm asking now, Matthew whispered, leaning into her touch like a man starved. Not as Alpha King, not as political alliance, just as the boy who promised. Ask what? Let me keep the second half. Let me choose you. Stacy Hill smiled, fierce and free and powerful. You already did. He didn't just come back as Alpha. He came back for her. The end.